Okay, so what does this do? This is one of the studies that got, the author of this study is really fed up with being asked to speak on it because she gets so many hate calls from marijuana users. But she did a study and found that marijuana users who started in their teenage years lost some IQ, and the very heaviest users lost an average of 8 IQ points. And these are people who used heavily in their teens and continue to. 8 IQ points is actually quite a bit. So I'd say it's the difference between having kind of a hard time in college versus doing very well or doing well in graduate school. It's the difference between a food service job or a white collar job. And it's a big difference, being passed over for promotions at work. And the thing is, this study found the same thing about, because I think she had them stop using for a whole month and then tested them. And the people who started after age 18, IQ returned to normal. People who started before age 18, those are the ones who had the permanent loss. She got the criticisms they gave her all the time were, well, you didn't account for this factor. And so she would go back and account for all these different factors. And it's important to do that because just because two things are correlated doesn't mean one causes the other. So she considered socioeconomic state, education, alcohol use. I mean, she went through more than a dozen different factors and still found lower IQ in the people who use marijuana in their teenage years. So I want to talk about marijuana denial for a little bit because denial is a little bit different for each drug. I didn't quite realize this, but I started back when alcohol was the only drug we dealt with, and I just thought that's what denial was like. But it turns out everybody's denial is different. So pot denial is, well, it didn't affect me. You know, it's only weed. It's harmless. It didn't. And so people will say this. They'll say, well, you know, I used in my teens and it didn't hurt me. And that's denial, because the fact is it did. All of us who used in our teens have been affected by it, and we live with that today. People are not, you know, either they're not aware or they're in denial or both. But, you know, if somebody breaks their leg playing football as a teenager and it hurts 10 years later, they know exactly what happened. They know why. But if somebody doesn't get a promotion at work, they're not going to think, you know, it's that pot that I smoked as a teenager. But it's just as much of an injury. So I want to say that, you know, all of us who used in our teenage years have lost some degree of function. And, you know, I would have been a better doctor if I'd never smoked pot. I certainly would have had a much better college career, and I dropped out for a while. I eventually went back. But I wish other people would say, you know, I wish, you know, they, in the past elections, they've talked about Barack Obama's teenage use and Jeb Bush's teenage use. And I wish they would say, I wish Obama would say, I would have been a better president if I'd never smoked pot. I wish Jeb Bush would say, I would have been a better governor and maybe a better presidential candidate if I never smoked pot. Because it's actually probably true for all of us who use in our teenage years. And the reason to say it is teenagers need to hear adults saying this. Anyway, marijuana interferes with education. So, and in not very high amounts. You know, I ask my patients, well, how often do you smoke pot? And they say, oh, just occasionally, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. And I go, well, actually, it stays in the body for 2 or 3 weeks. So if you smoke once a week, you've got metabolites all the time. They're not the most active metabolites, but it's a long-acting drug. So some of the research looked at high school and college students who smoked pot twice a month. And what they found is, I mean, more than twice a month, but some of them were just twice a month. But even the ones who just smoked pot twice a month did less homework, skipped more classes, got worse grades, and the biggest thing is dropping out more often. And this really is the dropout drug. There's no drug that increases the dropout rate like marijuana. Remember in the 60s and early 70s, it was what? Turn on, tune in, turn on, drop out. I think the dropout had more to do with the marijuana than the LSD. So there's a study that was done in 2000, and they looked at people who used marijuana regularly by the time they were 16, and they had more than twice the dropout rate. The other one, this study just came out a few years ago. In states that have medical marijuana laws, the high school dropout rate is 10% higher. Fewer of the students go to college. And of those who go, fewer finish college. And the thing is, states with medical marijuana laws actually have the adults have higher rates of college degrees. So for their kids to be going to college less is really serious. But this information is not getting out, and I wish the parents would hear this. It's kind of a cute study that was done in Maastricht in Holland. It's this little city right on the border with Belgium and France, and they've got a lot of foreign students, and they do not like marijuana tourists in Holland. They realize it's not a good thing, and so the city of Maastricht banned all marijuana sales to foreigners, including their foreign students. They had a lot of foreign students, and then somebody did a study of what happened, and what they found is that the students, their dropout rate decreased, and their grades improved, especially for classes that involved math. Whereas the local students from Holland, no effect. Okay, this is a study, this came out of Australia, and they looked at, Australia has, it's the same, I showed you a graph from the study before, it's the same thing. People who never used pot, people who used it 1 to 100 times, and this is all before the age of 18, how often they used it. 200, 300, more than 400 times. How many times did you use marijuana before the age of 18? And then at age 25, how many of them had a college degree? And it just slopes downhill. Now, part of this is not causative. Part of it is that people who are going to go to college are less likely to use marijuana. But part of this is causative. It goes from 36% down to 2%. It's pretty dramatic. The same study, this is the odds of being on welfare or being unemployed at some time in your life before age 25. And for the heaviest marijuana users, 3 times as likely to be unemployed or on welfare. And this is the one that bothers teenagers the most. What are the odds? And this is income. People who smoke pot in their teenage years regularly earn about 15 to 20% less as adults. Also, there's research that they are less likely to get married, people who smoke marijuana as teenagers.